Hi everyone, my name is Britta Hough. I'm with the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. I am actually regionally based here in Northeast Ohio, so welcome to Cleveland. I cover the Northeast region of the state, and I provide training and technical support for what we call community life engagement. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what that means when I say community life engagement, and how that ties into transition planning and IEPs. So just a little bit about me. Born and raised in Cleveland, on the west side of Cleveland. I'm about 20 miles from here is where I was born and raised and still currently live. I went to school for special education. So I went out of college and I taught for 2 years by a school that was owned and operated by the County Board of Developmental Disabilities. So I worked in the classroom for 2 years. A big part of what I did during that time was transition youth that were in our schools back into their home schools as our school was closing. So we were supporting the individuals to go back into their districts that weren't graduating. After that, I became a case manager for the county board. So I did case management for eligible individuals, waiver case management, did a lot of supporting individuals on all walks of life. About 4 years into that job, I had started a focus on employment. So I was working with individuals who were eligible for County Board of Developmental Disability Services that wanted to get a job. And my role was case management very targeted to that goal. So working in collaboration with our state VR agency was a big thing that I did. I worked a lot with transition age youth as they were getting ready to exit school and enter into adult services. From there, I took a position that was doing some regional work in 2016. Training case managers across the state for employment planning. How do we access resources? How do we ask the right questions? How do we do this planning to really result in an employment outcome? Following that, I came over to the department. So I've been with the department since 2017. Since 2017, I had 2 children. So I have a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old at home, both little girls, and they keep me really busy on top of the work that I do. So I'm really happy to be here with you guys today. I think this is really exciting. I was in the session prior, so I know a lot of you guys were in there as well. So we're going to focus on not just the IEP as a whole, but the transition section of the IEP. So let me hear a little bit about you guys really quick, then I promise I'll get started. So who's from Ohio? Woo! Where's about? Which county do you live in?
Oh, here, we're in Solon.
Solon in Cuyahoga County. Very good. Welcome. What other states do we've got? Oregon here. Who else is from Oregon? No one? California. Kansas. Georgia. North Carolina. Pennsylvania. Minnesota? Where are you guys from? Montana. That is phenomenal. We've got someone from, no one is from the same state except for us two. That is really cool. Okay, so what age ranges do we have for your kids? How old are they? 16, 15, 17, 16. Any younger than 15? 13. Good. 5. Perfect time to start thinking about transition. I love it, love it, love it. That is the best time to start thinking about transition. No, that's right. Okay, so when do you legally have to start planning for transition? Yeah, it depends on the state. 15 in your state? What's federal? What's the highest age that a state could go?
21.
No, as far as when you have to start transition planning. Hopefully not 21 is anywhere. 16 is the federal level, right? So we see all kinds of variations. Here in Ohio, it's age 14 required to start planning. That does not mean, that is when actually the requirement to have a transition section in your IEP is required. That doesn't mean transition planning doesn't start before then or shouldn't start before then. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're thinking for your 5-year-old and your 13-year-old. That's the mandate that when you have to. That doesn't mean that is when you have to wait until to have this conversation. What I'm going to really focus on, and I'm going to pass it on to Audrey here in a little bit about the actual IEP section, I'm going to focus on what happens up to it. I'm going to focus on the planning that has to happen. I'm just going to change the word. the planning that has to happen in order to develop that transition plan in the IEP. Because if you're just going into the IEP process and you're not doing the planning, how are we coming up with the goals and the steps that we need to take to help help your child reach those goals as an adult? Okay, so I'm going to start us off with a video. It's going to get us all hyped up. It's actually a Nike video. It has nothing to do with developmental disability. It has nothing to do with disability at all. But I actually saw this a few years ago. It's a pretty old commercial, and it just hit me in a way that I have to share it all the time.
There are no grand celebrations here, no speeches, no bright lights.
Hold, please. Yeah, I mean, why not? Okay, here, I have to pull it. I have to pull it over here.
There are no grand celebrations here, no speeches, no bright lights. But there are great athletes. Somehow we've come to believe that greatness is reserved for the chosen few, for the superstar. The truth is, greatness is for all of us. This is not about lowering expectations. It's about raising them for every last one of us. Because greatness is not in one special place. And it is not in one special person. Greatness is wherever somebody is trying to find it.
Love it. I love that commercial. It gives me chills still every single time that I watch it. Okay, so that's what it's all about, right? It's finding the greatness. It's not to say that this is this greatness, this life that we're trying to create as an adult, right? It's not just for any special person. It's not for a particular group of people. It's for all people. We have to find where people, all people, where their greatness is. How do we find it? How do we support it? Right? How do we drive with what people can do, where their strengths are, where their skills are? How do we dig in and find their greatness, right? That's what transition planning to me is all about. So when I say community life engagement, what does it mean? Okay, so out of all the states in here, who knows if you are an employment first state? If you have some type of executive order or some type of something for employment first? Oregon for sure. Some maybe. Never heard of it. Okay. So it's a big thing in Ohio. Hopefully you have heard of Employment First, but if you haven't, that's okay. It's a big thing a lot. It's a national movement. Okay. So if you don't have some type of executive order or some type of efforts specific to something called Employment First, your state probably will in the next several years. It's growing. It's pretty uncommon to have a state that has no efforts toward Employment First for individuals with developmental disabilities. Or disabilities in general, not just developmental disabilities. So community life engagement. In Ohio, we have an executive order signed by our governor in 2012. Okay, and what that executive order said is that all individuals are presumed capable of employment if they are of working age. It is our job as systems to figure out how to support someone along that path to employment and to maintain and achieve employment. It is not an initiative to say that everybody has to work, but it is an initiative that says that every single person in Ohio that is of working age has to have the opportunity to explore meaningful employment and has to have access to supports and services that promote competitive integrated employment, okay? Employment that is in the community and employment that is integrated with people with and without disabilities. That individuals should have access to services that support that before any other service. So in 2018, we expanded our role. We used to be project managers for Employment First exclusively as a project. And we kind of recognized that, well, it's more than just employment, right? We're not just talking about employment, but we're talking about meaningful life as a whole. How do people contribute to their communities either through employment and also outside of employment? For if people don't work, if people don't want to work, if they can't work at that moment, And if you have a job, you also have a life outside of it. So making sure that we are looking at, as a whole, how are we supporting a transition age youth to live a life in their communities and to lead that life. So it's understanding options and opportunities, discovering ways to contribute, and then to connect and participate meaningful in their communities. So what does that actually mean? It's more than actually being located, right? It's not just an outing. Okay, your older kids, do we go out when we're at school? We go out to places, out of the building and do things? Yes? No? I'm seeing a kind of a maybe, no. Okay. So sometimes, though, we do go out, and we're out, and we can be out every single day, multiple times a day, but are we actually connecting? Right? Is it meaningful? Is it meaningful to your child? Or was it something that, a lot of times what we see in transition services for youth is that everyone that comes through the class goes to X place and does this. And then next year they're going to go to Y place and do this. And then the following year they're going to go to Z place and do this. Regardless of what their goal is, regardless of what their interests and their strengths and their skills are, and where they are going to find the most meaning from being connected, right? It's more of the connection that the school has and the opportunity is there. So it's more than that. It's more than just that schedule to keep you busy. It's more than just fun and recreational things. Okay, it involves active participation and membership. What does active participation mean?
Participating actively.
Yeah, it does. It means that you're participating actively. I know it. You guys have been through the ringer this week. I saw your guys' schedule. I was like, wow, that's a long conference, but it's awesome. So active participation means that it's reciprocal, right? It's a valued role. It's something that I value as a community member, and I value because it's important to me. Okay, so it's back and forth. It's not being just in a place. It's being a part of a place where people miss you when you don't show up, where you build connections and have relationships that develop because of that shared interest. Okay, it's connection to those other people that share those interests, that share the preference, the skills, whatever it is. Making a contribution, right? It's not about going and getting, because then you're not actively a part of that community. You're just in it. People are empowered to decide and control their future, right? They lead this life, or we use the information that we know about what is important to them to help them lead that life. Stresses what they can do. Puts an emphasis on experience. This is huge. Huge. How did we learn about what our interests and strengths are? By trying it, by doing it, by being and experiencing multiple things, right? When you're talking about employment specifically, I hear all the time, well, I don't want to work, right? Well, what were people asking at the table? Say, do you want to work? First of all, if someone asked me that, I would say no. No, I don't want to work, but I do because I know what it brings to my life, right? I know that having that valued role is important to me for more than one reason. I know what type of job is important to me because I've had multiple jobs, because I've tried it, because I figured out what I didn't like really quickly, right? I never ever, when I was younger, thought that this would be my job. I got here through experience. We have to put a heavy emphasis on experience, getting out, doing, trying, connecting, figuring out what sticks. All people can learn and contribute to their communities. Supports people to follow their own interests, and it looks different for everyone. Individualized. That is it. IEP, the first word is individualized. Specific. Very much aligned to what is success for your child is going to look different, just as success in my life is going to look different in what you consider success for your life. Okay? I'm going to show you one more video. It's a story of an individual that lives in Ohio named Mike. And just to demonstrate kind of when I say community life engagement, Mike is very connected to his community in ways that he'll talk a little bit about what his employment is and how he's connected through his love for basketball. Hold on, I gotta switch it over.
Oh, there it is. It's on there.
My first day, I'm scared. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in a little shell.
How do you feel now?
I'm good. I work here 5 years. It's a great place to work. I'm going to do 5 plus coaching. It's changed me. I challenge myself. I open up. Now I meet more people already. That's good for me. Hey, Allison.
Hey, how are you?
How much time do you think you spend thinking about basketball?
A lot. I coaching with Allison with Disabilities 8 years now. I love coaching basketball. Why? I was a player first. Basketball is in blood in me. My cousins played, my dad played. Coaching basketball is passion for me.
He's in charge of making sure we got the schedule. He's in charge of making sure that our bookkeeper has the book. He's paying referees. All the stuff that I used to handle, now I can focus on getting the team ready, and he handles all the extra stuff. And he pushes the girls, and that's a role that he's grown into. It wasn't something that just happened. He's had to earn the respect of everybody, as we all do. He's had to show that he's capable, and he's more than capable. They want Mike to be on their sideline.
It's really important for me. I'm strict coach. I will help the team win. They grow up. I want to see them play college, end up in the WNBA. 30 seconds! He has a community within the basketball community that's bigger than anything. We can walk into a gym and half of the referees, if not more, know who Mike is. Half of the coaches, if not all the coaches, know who Mike is. And Mike knows all of them by name. He's cracked that hard coding that's all competitive, no fun, that softens everybody else, that life's bigger than just sports. What Mike's able to do, I think, gives everybody hope. You gotta find your right niche. You gotta find what you're passionate about. We all do. Yeah, I mean, Allison's great friends, my best friends. She helps me a lot as a coach. I don't know my features yet about basketball. We don't know. Yes. Yes. Bye, ladies. Hey. I want to head coach another team. And that's my dream. Bye, guys. Coaching is my passion in career.
So Mike lives in the Cincinnati area, and he receives services and supports from an agency called Starfire. So that's a little video about Mike, just to kind of demonstrate that he was connected in a way through employment, showed kind of a little bit in his job in the beginning. So he has a job, he works at a firm, I believe, and then he goes and coaches basketball because that's what he's interested in. That's what he did. He played basketball. He likes that environment. And he's a part of, he's very much embedded in that community. So that's really what we're talking about when we talk about building that life. And that is the focus of that transition plan, right? That is the intent of that transition plan, is to envision and start working towards building and finding out what this life as an adult is going to look like. How can I be connected? How can I be a part of? What is it going to look like? What kinds of things do we still need to figure out? That's a lot of transition planning, right? It's answering questions. It's digging deeper, gathering more information because we don't know enough. So when Ohio became an Ohio employment first state and earlier, we kind of set our priorities for our vision for our state and how are we going to support individuals to be engaged in their communities in multiple layers and multiple ways. So we set these priorities that we really bring all of our focus and all of our efforts on, which is person-centered planning. That's a buzzword. We've heard that, right? We know what it means. Yeah. Yeah, we know what it's supposed to mean, right? Person-centered, it's individualized. That's why you have an individualized and you have an IEP for a reason. Community membership and community employment. So with those those things kind of being the focus of all of our work. Part of our executive order forced us as a state to develop a task force. So we have a task force that was written into that executive order. Our governor said, hey, state agencies, get together, reduce your silos, get rid of the policies that are reducing us to be able to work together, get rid of the reduction, you're duplicating efforts, right? You're working in silos. So Department of Education, Department of Developmental Disabilities, the state VR agency, Department of Medicaid, mental health, drug and addiction, job and family services. We all sit at the table every month. I was just at the meeting on Thursday. We still, since 2012, are still working on doing this, right? It's tough. It's hard. We all have our own things that we have to accomplish within our funding structure, within our entity, whatever our main focus is. So one of the things that we focus on the most is transition. Why? Why do we focus on transition age youth? We'll talk about employment.
They're going to leave school and they need to be part of society.
Yeah, those are the up-and-coming workforce, right? Those are the up-and-coming members of our communities, right? People coming out of school. So how do we focus on the transition age youth to start this conversation early and make sure that they have access to opportunities and experience so that they're not coming into adult services, from our perspective, without the experience and without the things, right? So we have a vision plan that has action steps that's very tangible for how are we as a state across all entities, not just Department of Developmental Disabilities. How are we going to do this? And what are our core principles? So community employment is the expectation for all youth. Okay, our executive order tells us that's what it has to be, but also because we as a system want to believe that and we want to be able to support that. Transition planning requires multi-agency collaboration. I'm going to talk a lot about that. Right? I mentioned all of those state entities. That means that all of those state entities, partners, may be at the table for your transition planning, or may need to be, or you may want them there at different times. Early conversation's critical. There's multiple pathways to community employment. Right? I have 4 coworkers. We all cover a region of this state. None of us took the same path to get to that job. Not even close. Okay, multiple pathways to employment. It doesn't look the same for anyone. Person-centered planning is key. So one of the first things we did early on, probably back in 2013, we developed and started developing and continue to develop this Ohio Employment First Transition Framework. And this is the framework that is intended to assist its tools and resources and strategies and things, templates, if you will, if you want to call it that. But it's a framework, a way of thinking, okay, and a way of doing. So there's multiple layers. We did this in a layered approach. So we have resources that address the state level resources, right? How are we have interagency agreements written between our state partners and continuing to develop those to say, how are we going to work together? How are we going to share data? How are we going to make this easier for people that are supported by multiple systems? There's also, we have regulation and rule that's at the state level. We also have that regional county level of support, right? Resources for how do you do this at the local level? How does each county come together with multi-systems and say, how do we do this better? Has each school district get involved in that? How do we know how well we're equipped to support individuals to do this and do it well? Right? We have some assessment tools and things that help to identify some of the gaps. And then at the individual level, which is really what I'm going to focus on today. So these practices lead to those individualized adult life goals, ongoing transition planning, and access to meaningful service for transition. So we focus on these 3 non-negotiable elements, which are person-centered, outcome-focused, and agency-neutral. Okay, so if nothing else you get from my presentation, remember these 3 words. And try and think when you're transition planning, is this happening? Is all of our efforts around transition focused on my child, person-centered? Is all of the efforts focused on where we're going, on those goals that we have set for what does meaningful life look like for my child based on what we know? And are these agencies coming together at the table and I say leave their hat at the door? Or are they coming there because their policy is driving something that makes them be at the table and has to have this plan done, or has to have this documentation, or has to do, is everyone there to plan? Are we doing true transition planning, or are we just going through the formalized, what do we need to do to get to meet the policy? Is the planning happening first before we get there? Because that stuff's not going to go away, because when federal dollars are involved, they want to know and they want to make sure that things are happening. So their policy is always going to be there. But how are we leaving our policy at the door and leaving our own agency, what we need, while we're planning, leaving it at the door? And how are we aligning those efforts with those agencies that are there? So agency neutral, right? You have to create a team to walk the path. You have to make sure that the youth is the most important member of the team. Oh, obviously, right? It is their life. But how are we making sure that we have them at the table and their voice is the one driving all of the conversation? And I don't mean their literal voice. Okay, how are we using what we know about somebody, or how are we using special education services to help figure that out? Or not just special education services, how are we kind of all on that team helping to figure that out? What's the plan? Family members, friends, other advocates, right? There is no limit of how many people can be a part of this transition team. It does not mean if you're a part of a transition team that you have to go to an IEP meeting and then you check the box that you're a part of the team. Okay, you don't have to actually sit around a table. If you could believe it or not, transition planning probably doesn't always occur sitting around the table with the team. Okay, that could be a part of it, where we're kind of brainstorming together. But how are we getting input and getting information from all people that are important to your child? Who has the information? Who wants to be a part of this big picture, right? Community members, connections. Who do we need to pull in? The educators will be there. Vocational rehabilitation counselors. Every state has them. Okay, federal WIOA. Every state has vocational rehabilitation counselors. They are there. They are the state entity that helps individuals with barriers to employment to get there. If employment is something that you want for your child, or that your child wants, then at some point during transition, they should be at the table providing information into the transition plan. And you want them at the table as you exit. If not, if they can't do anything while you're in school, so our VR agency can, and there's a huge federal push for pre-employment transition services, which happen very young. So in Ohio, we're starting to get into schools at age 14. Children are accessing services that young, if it makes sense, in addition to what's happening with the school. So now we have multiple entities already at the table. Case managers, do you have a case manager through the county board? Are you eligible for services for the county board? If you have other case managers, mental health, you have a case manager through Medicaid managed care plan, right? Any case manager, anyone who you're attached to, should probably be a part of this conversation. Okay, medical professionals, if it makes sense, probably in this world it does, right? And again, not to say that your pediatrician or your medical professional is going to come to your IEP meeting, but their input sure is important in this, right? We can't do it in silo. So again, as they come together to collaborate, activities should occur where everyone sees the value of that youth, and no single policy or procedures are the priority, right? So I always hear like, well, we have to get together for the IEP meeting by this date, or we have to have the school representative, and we have to have the parent invitation, we have to have all these things. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about transition planning and being agency neutral. Another thing with agency neutral is that we should be able to reduce the silos a little bit at the individual level and say, how are we coordinating supports from various systems and resources, right? Just because you're in school doesn't mean that the only thing that you should be leaning on for that transition plan, the only person or the only entity on that action step plan shouldn't just be school, right? We don't really do that very frequently ever, right? My boss never gives me even a task and says, here, this is all on you. This is every step of the way is going to be you. It doesn't happen, right? When we want something done, we pull in all the power that we can get. All team members understand the outcome. What are we striving for? We're all on the same page. Nothing drives me crazier. Do you have all these I plans? Are you that far along yet where you have your service plan through the school, your IEP? Do you have a service plan? ISP is what we call it here. You've got 4 I plans. Nothing drives me crazier than reading 4 different I plans that sound like 4 different kids or 4 different targets identified, right? We're all going in separate directions. No wonder we can't get anything done, right? We're running around in a circle. So everyone has to be on that same page, the high expectation for those successful actions. We work together. We're responsive to the changing needs and desires. How many times do you develop a plan and that plan actually pans through that way? Right? Kids are teaching me that does not happen, ever. Okay? Not many times. You have to be responsive. This is life. As we experience, this plan is going to change. We should not just be talking about a transition planning meeting one time and then revisiting it a year later. Because lots have changed in that year and we probably missed a lot of information. Aware of the time frames, right? We're talking about a transition plan that's going to span over several years. Okay? We shouldn't be working on one action step for all several years. Okay? We want to make sure that we are moving along and that if we're not, we're readjusting our way of doing. Discover more, so this is about the person-centered part, right? Like I said, a lot of transition planning is discovering. Actually, for any youth, disability or not, what is high school used for and middle school used for other than discovering about yourself? Right? That's what it's all about. It's about figuring out who are you and where's your footprint. Using these formal and informal methods. Okay, so transition age assessment, right? That's mandated. What does that mean? Paper and pencil assessment? A specific tool? What kinds of tools are being used in your kids' plans to gather information and input? One interest survey. We got it. An official form, adaptive. And then we gather it all and put it together. Okay. I know sometimes I hear of like a survey sent home about transition planning, like what's your vision for a good life? Does that happen? You fill it out and send it back? I'm telling you, I don't care what you have involved, it's not enough. This is the main focus of transition, is discovering those things. And it doesn't have to be a formal assessment, right? We can gather information in all kinds of ways. Decide what types of activities will help the team discover valuable information to plan and achieve for successful adult outcomes. When there's a question at the table, that means that it has to be responded with an action that's going to gather more information to get to the heart of what the question is, right? So if we're sitting there saying, well, I don't know what kind of job, what's your son's name? James. I don't know what kind of job James would want to do. Action step, we need to gather more information about where his skills are, where his strengths are, and how that relates to the world of employment. We have to probably have some action step for some experience. Is that not assessment? How are we using experiences to gather that information and record out and report out to the team to use that in our planning? Okay? Develop youth choice-making independent skills, right? Self-advocacy. How are we supporting the youth to speak up for themselves, right? Or to tell us what they envision or when they are experiencing something, okay? And thinking outside the box. If you're picking from a drop-down anything, you might not hit it on the head. I don't know if that's apparent or not. I will say that early in my student teaching, I was given a book. And I was pretty pumped up when I was in school to be an educator. I was like, yes, this is awesome. I get to do like individual, like I get to be like a counselor and an educator at the same time because it's going to be specific for each person. And I really want to see where these students are going to go and what this is going to look like. And this is so cool. And I love transition planning in college. In practice, I got to my first school for my internship or my student teaching. And I was handed a book with drop downs. It was a electronic book. In mass amounts of pages. So there was lots of options for drop down, but they all were in the drop down. These were for IEP goals. IEP transition goals and academic goals and social, all the goals you can think of in a drop down to say which one does it most fit under. And I got to tell you guys, that is probably the biggest reason why I'm not a teacher right now, because it crushed my soul that it wasn't individualized, and I was super psyched about that part, remember? And I got there, and it's like, is it individualized? Because I'm picking from a drop down of multiple options, but I know there's more options than that, right? Because the world's the canvas, right? We don't have any set amount of limitations around what life can look like after high school. I don't. I never did. Nobody said to me when I was in high school, hey, pick from this drop down of what job you want and where you want to live and what kind of education you want. If it's not in the drop down, you can't do it. Right? Nobody said that. Nobody ever asked me if I wanted to work either, which is weird. They just expect it. Okay? How are we making sure that we're discovering the unique strengths, interests, abilities, preferences? What resources are out there? How are we resource mapping specific to your child? Right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about a tool that can help us do that. What support strategies? What are those conditions for success? And then using all that information to identify the outcome. Where are we going? So outcome-focused planning, it's simply, where's the youth going? Where is the youth today? We're identifying the end point and the beginning point. And what steps can the youth and the team take to help close that gap? Okay, I always use a GPS as an example here. That's what transition planning is. What does the GPS need first? Destination. Where are you going? Then what's the next thing it's going to need? Where are you coming from? Right? So it's going to say, here's the end point, here's the beginning point, and then it's going to give you the step-by-step turns to actually get there. That's exactly what this is. Right? If we just get in our car and start driving, we're going to end up somewhere, but it may not be where we're trying to go. Walk, drive, bus, all kinds of things we need to know. Finding those endpoints, the end point and where you are now is the only way to do that. So, whoops. So we're focusing on the meaningful adult life outcomes. Actions and supports are actually, we're doing them because we think it's going to help us get closer to that larger goal. Okay? Results and progress are seen. And what if they're not? What if we don't see results or progress? Yeah, we ran into a detour. We probably need to reevaluate our method of getting there. Maybe we need to park our car and take the bus. Okay? So making sure that we're so intentful and we're so focused on where this is getting us. And it's going to be broken into smaller chunks, right? The bigger outcome, what is it going to be? That's scary. But if you break it down into those smaller chunks, you could start chipping away and getting closer and closer and closer. Okay? Oh, I just kind of said that quote offhand. I forgot that was in there. So then, and only then, after you do this planning, after you discover what you already know, figure out what things we're going to do to get more information, come together, pull the right people at the table, knowing where we're going, what things make the most sense, right? Take the scary transition plan out of it and just pretend you're sitting around a table talking about, like, how are we going to help my kid get a job? right? Take the disability specific part out of it. The IEP processes, think about it differently. If you were around the table with your friends, what kinds of questions would you be asking? Right? Take that scary, processy, policy type thing out of the picture and just focus on how are we going to get there? What things make sense based on what we know, and if we don't know, then an action step to figure it out. And then we identify those services, supports, and activities to help build that path. So then we assign it to who, because here's what also happens when we're not being agency neutral. I used to work for the county board. I authorized Medicaid dollars for waiver services. So if I came to the table and said, hi, I'm Britta, I'm with the county board, I offer this array of service, guess what we're going to land on for step number 1? One of those array of services in that menu of services. And is it going to be the best thing? I don't know. But if we don't explore everything and put all resources on the table and really figure out what makes the most sense, if we just dive into what's at the table, because I came to the table saying I can authorize this service, then we're going to land there, transition planning done. We're going to access the service that's available, but it may not be the right fit or the right time or the right next step. Okay, so really, really coordinating things in a way that are saying, how can we get there? And then who can support him or her? And making sure that who is bigger than just one entity or bigger than just all on you as a parent. Okay? So in order to support the inclusive quality community life, support should be in a combination and partnership of, and this is a resource I'm going to show you in a little bit called Charting the Life Course, but personal strengths and assets from the individual and the family, right? What do we already bring to the table? Relationship-based supports. Who do I call when I need something? Who can I call? And this is just kind of figuring out, maybe you're doing this more specifically, but in the beginning when we're talking about who should be at the table, kind of walk through this example, put it out there, not to say that they're going to come to every meeting, but to know and remember that they're available if we need something potentially. Maybe there's a good match for something we identify. Technology, how are we using technology? Community resources, things that you or I or anyone can access. And then we get to the eligibility-based supports. So in combination of all of these things, we siloed, like eligibility-based supports, I'm going to tell you right now, openly and honestly, they are not going to meet your need alone. Okay? It has to be in combination. It has to be these wraparound, like using what's already there and then supplementing what isn't through eligibility specific. Because again, when we want to get something done, we pool power. Were you going to say something?
Whenever I go to solve a problem, it always feels like that sequence is split.
Yep. Eligibility-based supports is where you... Yeah, I would say that I'm going to show you this integrated star, and it's literally 5 points of a star for each of these things. And if you fill it out for one problem, if all you have is eligibility specific, you're probably a little limited. Right? It could be more robust. It could be a better plan. It could be a more strategic plan if we're utilizing multiple avenues to help us get there. So this is just another way of saying it, right? Where's the youth going? It's that outcome. What skills and credentials are needed to meet that outcome, right? Sometimes we're like basing our steps on some arbitrary like list of things that we should have, like employment, right? Soft skills. What soft skills are important for every single employee? Is there one soft skill that every single employee must have or they will lose their job? Show up on time. Is that really for all employees? Because I have a flexible work schedule. Yeah, work from home and whenever I want. If I have a self-business, I don't have to show up on time. Common courtesy. What if I'm working in the back of an oil shop or a car shop changing oil by myself all day? Do I really need to be courteous? Do I need to smell good? Right? So there is no there is, I'm not saying never, but we should be a little bit more targeted than that. What are the skills and credentials needed to meet the outcome we're actually trying to achieve? And then we figure out the current assessment, the needed skills. Where are we? What's the baseline for where we're going? If those two things aren't aligned, we're just kind of shooting in the dark, right? Now you have the gap. Now you can break down each of those skills, each of those credentials. You break it down into smaller chunks. Now they're right here. They need X, Y, Z, but they only have X. Let's focus on getting Y. Right? Let's just get a little bit closer. Let's get half of Y. Then you identify those steps, actions, experiences to close that gap. So I'm going to go into some resources here, but for transition planning to be on par, it has to have a little piece of all of these things. So the predictors, those are the what. Those are the components. Those are the program structures, the service, the what are we actually doing. Okay, the thing. The practices, the how. How do we implement it? How do we individualize it? How does it look for this youth? And then the planning, and that's that bigger picture, the guide, the map. Okay, the combination of those three things is that trifecta for transition success. So we talked about the Ohio Employment First Transition Framework. I talked a little bit about that. It is Ohio. We developed it, but it is not specific enough to Ohio where you couldn't use it. Okay, so you can access this resource. It's available online at ohioemploymentfirst.org. We here nationally, I'm not bragging, but I kind of am, that our webpage is one of the best web pages for employment for individuals with disabilities in the country. I mean, they say that, or maybe they just tell us that. Either way, I think it's pretty robust. And where we have a lot of our resources are in that transition planning tab. This is updated actually this week. I did this PowerPoint, a week ago, and the page looks different because we're always updating it. This now says Community Life Guide. Okay, so those two resources are available to you, can absolutely be used by you as much as they can be used by people that live in Ohio. Okay, transition planning, you go to this tab, it will walk you through those different layers of things. Those individual level resources is what we're going to talk a little bit about. This Community Life Guide, it's an interactive online guide for job seekers is one of the parts, and the other is community health and safety. Okay, so those are just interactive online tools that you can use, that educators could use, that anyone can really access. So under the individual tab for the transition framework, we have these evidence-based predictors. So these are the what. This is based on research through the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, NTACT. Have we heard of them? Okay, they're like the research behind what do we know if this is present results in better outcomes. They get this from doing those after, like, I interview you at time of graduation, I call you in a year, I call you in 2 years, so that I can identify what things happened, what were present, that resulted in a positive outcome. Okay, how do we know? This is based on research. They didn't make this stuff up. It's a lot of common sense, to tell you the truth. But it is based on research. So that youth that were engaged in these things have improved post-school outcomes in education, employment, and independent living. So we broke them down as a state. I think they had 18 predictors, the national research. We broke those into 8 categories in the state of Ohio. And we have this tool will break down each area, tell you what the research tells you, where did the research come from, what's an example of what that would mean, what does it look like, right? It kind of really breaks it down for you. Where's the support or the resources that are attached to that predictor? So collaborative networks for student support, right? That multi-agency planning. Individualized career development, authentic work experience, social and social-emotional instruction and skills, academic, vocational, occupational education and prep, supporting parental involvement and expectation. You guys all traveled to Ohio for a conference. Check. Okay, that predictor is present for your kids. Self-determination, independent living skills, and then inclusive practices and programs. Again, you could have probably told me if these things are present, we're going to be successful. But this tool can help you get to, okay, is this present in my child's team or isn't it? And how do I make sure it is? Because if I have all 8 of these things present in my transition plan, then there's a good chance that my youth is going to get there. And then evidence-based practices are the how. These are the support strategies, the teaching methods. They can be used to teach a variety of skills in a variety of settings. It promotes independence, okay? These are the things that we do. How many of you have an IEP goal that has an action step that includes the word prompt, verbal prompt? Yeah. Physical prompt. Yeah, we know those terms. That is one way to support somebody. I have a 2-year-old who verbal prompts are the very last support strategy that I need to use for her. Because the second I say it, and it's not her idea, she's not doing it. Okay, we're potty training. If I say, Ella, do you have to go potty? No, I don't. Okay, so let's go potty. Let's put you on a training schedule. That's what I tried at first. Like every hour, we're going to sit on the potty and get an M&M. Oh, no, that didn't work even one time. Not one time did I was successful with saying, it's time to sit on the potty. Let's go and sit. Let's see. Not one time did she even sit. Now I ask, because I prompt the question, but if she says no, I leave it. And I ask again, hey. And then I just say, oh, mom's got to go potty. Do you? Right? How can I get her to have the idea? Because that's how we got to potty training. Okay, so don't use, and if you're running into the wall of I'm not getting it, right? I'm not learning the skill, I'm not getting it. How are we making sure we're using multiple different ways and trying different things? So these, again, you've heard of them. They're not things that it takes an expert to understand. But we know through research that these ways, if we use multiple different strategies, that people will learn skills or use the supports that make them more independent.
We just put least restrictive prompt on our IEP. So
Yeah, so what does that mean?
it's the one that's least, that she can do with the least amount of prompts.
Right, so what does that mean? But what does that mean for your daughter?
Well, I don't want them doing the hand over hand if she just needs a verbal prompt.
Right, but does it mean that we're trying to identify what's going to help her the most? What's going to help her to be the most independent? And are they specifically called out that way? Because if I was the teacher, am I going to know what least restrictive means? Okay, good. As long as it's spelled out and clear and specific, right? And how are we making sure if we're not getting it after some time, we're not just giving up on the goal without first trying different ways of support? When I hear people say unrealistic goals, I just can't even go there because I don't like that term. It doesn't make any sense to me. What is unrealistic to me doesn't mean the same to somebody else. And who am I to say what somebody can and can't do? And if somebody can't do something, I want to take a look in the mirror to see how my supports are impacting that. Okay? How are we making sure that we are using lots and lots of different ways to support growth? This is just what that job seeker's guide looks like. Charting the Life course, if you haven't heard of it, please go on. It's actually came out of Missouri, but it's a national framework at this point. But it really is this guiding principle that people throughout all stages of life and through all these different areas, so daily life and employment, social I cannot talk this afternoon. Social and spirituality. Thank you. I can say that word on a normal day, I promise. Community living, citizenship and advocacy. So it breaks down different areas as well as the life stages and life domains. So here they are all kind of broken down. So there's tools and resources around all of these areas and all of these age life stages. This is that integrated STAR I was talking about. So you can start, this is the last point you want to get to, is the eligibility specific. But how are we? So we can do this in lots of ways. We can use this tool just as like that resource mapping, kind of throwing it all out there to kind of pick and choose what we need at what times. And then we can be more specific to say, okay, here's the employment goal in here, or here's the thing we're trying to reach. How are we using and what actual supports or resources are we using from that larger bank for that targeted goal? Okay, how are we making sure that we have something in each of those boxes. They have this, this daily life and employment guide that's specific to Missouri, but again, can be used anywhere. The resources will vary from state, but this is a really cool guide that's really focused on that transition age youth and families to really figure out what life's gonna look like. So it's that vision, right? Helping to develop that vision. They have a whole, under training, they have like a 8-part recorded webinar series on how to use this guide and how to use these tools. They have examples on there, and they have all kinds of things as far as tools to help you get that vision for a good life. So I went beyond where I thought that I would be, which isn't that unusual for me, if you can believe it. But any questions for me? I'm glad you guys were asking questions throughout. I'm going to pass it to Audrey. She's going to focus really specific on the actual IEP part that works really well with the planning that happens before to get there.
Take questions at the end.
Yeah, I'll stick around in any way, and we will just keep plucking away.
So, what's the purpose of education? And grandmothers in here are thinking, why did I come to this presentation? This is way beyond where I need to be thinking about yet. But I wish I had thought about and knew about some of these things when my son was 5. The whole purpose of education is to get out of school and be able to do something with your life. Live, have friends, engage in the community. And if you're not thinking about it early, it makes it harder. And I do think that most people are thinking about transition at about 16, and it's not too late, but it's pretty late. And the purpose of the law, IDEA, is to ensure that all children have that FAPE, that free and appropriate public education, to prepare them for that further education, employment, and independent living, so that they can lead productive and independent adult lives to the maximum extent possible. And we also want to ensure the effectiveness of instruction. Ensure the effectiveness of instruction. I mentioned in my previous presentation, the language of IDEA is very specific. So if it says something in IDEA, it means that. So that's it's good to keep looking at that. So when do we start thinking about it? As young as possible. Monica put 8. She said, say 8. I'm like, I'm thinking 4 or 5, right? I want to know early. I want to start thinking about it early because it's very easy to fall off the diploma track. And in our kids who have a lot of issues and needs, I see a lot of school teams saying, that child's never going to learn how to read. That child belongs in a special school. That child has no intellectual capability, and they're 5. I don't know what that child is going to learn how to do. Did you know what your outcome was going to be like at 5? Did anyone even question it? Every kid gets sent to school every day. They're 5 years old, and we don't ever say, we don't know. Why are we educating this kid? We don't think this kid's ever going to make it. That's not what we say. Teachers like you get all jazzed up, and they go in every day, and they're amped because they think they're going to get their kid through school. They're going to make progress, and then we don't have that assumption always with kids that have more impairments and more issues, right? So that's why I want to start early. I want it to start as early as possible. The other thing we need to be aware of is you can extend the runway. So technically, you're entitled to FAPE, a free and appropriate public education, and with an IEP until the child achieves a diploma, a normal diploma, a regular diploma, or is age 22. And so if these transition services, if you're late to the game and you're feeling like, whoa, I just really blew it, and I should have been, my kid's 18 and I just heard Britta talk, and now I wish I had done some of this, you can buy more time. I'm going to tell you how to do that. So the elements of the transition plan, it's very similar to all the stuff that Britta went over. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over it. One thing I want to point out is IDEA requires supports in beyond academics. It's education, it's social emotional, it's employment, and then adult living. It's functional, it's social, it's what is their recreation life like? What is their social life going to be like? These are all, so That's why the speech therapist needs to start working on pragmatics with these kids that have pragmatic issues in the early elementary grades. You don't wait till they're 16 and be like, oh, transition's coming. Let's start teaching you how to have conversations. It's too late. So you want to start thinking about what kinds of skills, like you were talking about. We have an idea about the kind of skills that make you successful for a job. You don't know what kind of job your kid's going to want, but we can say, it'd be nice if the kid was polite. We're all teaching our kids how to say thank you, right? When do we start that? When did you teach your kid to say thank you? I taught my kids to say thank you when they were 2. It's like the second phrase they learned, right? Mommy, daddy, thank you. I'm just that kind of mom. But most of us do that. We don't wait. We're not going to wait. Well, they don't need to say thank you yet. I'm taking care of everything. You've talked about age-appropriate transition. In the IEP, the law says that this has to be developed. The goals have to be written in the following areas: education, training, employment, and independent living as needed. I would argue that every kid who has a brain injury, who's had brain surgery for epilepsy, is going to require support with independent living skills. If they are not part of the IEP by the time they go to high school, they should be. They could maybe even be part of the IEP much, much earlier. So the other thing about our kids, they don't generalize skills well. So when you talk about teaching a concrete skill and expecting them to go out and run with it, our kids may require a lot more planning, preparation, and training than the typical child, right? So start early. We want to start early. Briefly on evaluations, because my role here this weekend was to really talk about assessments. There are specific requirements of transition assessments. By the way, my slides and Britta's slides are on sched.org, and I did check. If you do it from a computer, it'll pop open with a PDF. You can also email me if you need any of the slides. So I'm not going to read all the slides for you in the interest of time. This is what the transition evaluation requires. It's what services does the student need to be successful in post-secondary, which means after school life after school. And there's all these different measures that can be used. The student should be assessed in as many areas as necessary to ensure that the transition services are comprehensive. We want to give the student all the possible chances for success. Assessments need to be done in different settings. So if the child is measured for their vocational skills at school with people they know already that they've been going to school with for a few years and they're doing great, oh yeah, Johnny can do pretend cupcake baking and selling at recess, he's doing great. That's not a meaningful assessment. So I want to see an assessment of my kid at a coffee shop where he's interning for an hour a week, and there's a vocational assessor with him looking at how is he interacting with customers when they come up, how is he counting change, whatever it ends up being. So assessments actually have to be in the setting of what the skill you are measuring. That's a really important piece. The goals, so this is true of all goals. It has to address more than one of the designated areas that were required, and it has to meet the following requirements. It has to be measurable. So what is measurable? It means you have to be able to count it. You have to be able to measure it. It has to be intended to occur for post-secondary goals after the student graduates, and it has to be updated every year. Those are the basics. Possible goal areas. Required goals are in the first column, but for our kids, we want to look at other issues. If the child has a visual impairment, they're going to need mobility training, travel training, starting pretty early. My son started receiving mobility training when he was 3. When he was 6, we had an incredible orientation mobility specialist who said, I'd like to start working on having Bennett walk around the neighborhood and do some mapping skills outside of the school building. We walked to and from school. He's like, can I work on the route to and from school? I said, yeah, that's great. When he was 8, he said, I think we should start working on taking the bus. Why did he start so young? Because my kid at 14, unlike my other one who's 13, I'm not just going to give him a fast pass and a cell phone when he's 14 and be like, go, figure it out, like my typical son, right? He needed a lot of practice. So you're thinking about that. You want to start young so you can start, like, what are the areas they're going to need a lot of supports? Executive functioning affects almost all of our kids after epilepsy surgery. That means they don't plan well. They don't think, they don't do exactly what we're talking about. We're here, I want to get here, what are all the steps in between? There are training programs and courses on executive functioning. There are ways to teach these skills. A lot of our kids have they're good at memorizing lists. So if you teach them, this this is point A, this is point B, and this is how you write out the steps in between, and they get some support with that, they will learn these skills, but not without support, so start early. Self-advocacy, can they ask for directions? Can they walk into a store and buy something? These are the skills my son started working on in early elementary school. Behavior, how are they functioning in the community? And then technology, I think every child should have assistive technology skills as early as possible, as early as possible, and start to use technology with vision impairments, motor impairments, auditory impairments. Those tools are critical for them to be educated and then in post-secondary life. So I'm gonna quickly just talk about this one IEP. I thought this was a great example. I worked with this kid last year. He's a boy with epilepsy, 8th grade boy. Not epilepsy surgery, by the way, I just want to make that clear, but this was just such a good example, I wanted to use this IEP. So he had not been evaluated since before he was moved into a self-contained classroom 4 years earlier in 5th grade, and it was 8th grade, had not had any evaluations. These were the goals in his IEP, in an SDC. Why did this kid need to be in a special day class? He had no goals. And the law says the IEP includes coordinated measurable annual IEP goals and transition services that will reasonably enable the student to meet the post-secondary goals. So obviously that IEP, I was so excited to get it. It's actually my favorite kind of case because there's no way I could make it any worse. Okay. So then we requested a comprehensive assessment in all areas of suspected disability. We used the template letter from our website. We requested all of these assessment areas. He was assessed in every area except for the vision assessment we wanted was not exactly what they did, but we decided not to request an independent evaluation on that because we felt like everything else covered it. But this was the assessment he got. He got a partial vision evaluation. After the comprehensive evaluation, these are the goal areas that he had goals in. So now he's in 9th grade this year. And these are just some of the, I'm just going to quickly go through this because there's a lot. And these are not perfect goals. There is no perfect goal. I am not a good goal writer because there's no such thing as being a good goal writer. It's so individualized. But like everything I've said in my previous presentations, if you've heard me before, if you don't write it down, it's not going to happen. If it's not stated in the goal, it's not going to happen. I think, Britta, your point to Roxanne about like, well, what is a less restrictive prompt, right? We know that if it's not really clearly spelled out, then it's not understood. And anyone who has never read an IEP before and never read a neurosurgical report, anyone who walks by and picks up your child's IEP should know your child and know what the goal is. And what I always say, when I can't understand what a goal is, I say to the team, what will the child be doing when the goal is met? And I cannot tell you how many times I've asked that question and nobody on the team can answer the question. So I'm showing you these goals. I'm proud of the goals. And the mom's thrilled. I'm going to show you, there's pages and pages of them. I'm going to go really quick. But they're not perfect. So just know that. I'm giving you that caveat. So things like by the next IEP, we didn't put the dates in because I just wanted to give you a general idea, with appropriate scaffolding. Okay, now I want to know what appropriate scaffolding is, but I did add, such as the teacher asking specific guided questions, the student will determine the central theme of a grade level text proficiently, as demonstrated by data collection, with 80% accuracy in 5 out of 5 consecutive trials. We also, in another part of the IEP, got written in that data collection would happen every 6 weeks, that there would be a progress meeting with the parents every 12 weeks. So that the data, we have 5 weeks of data collection, a week of summarizing, the parent gets a report every 6 weeks, and every 12 weeks we meet to discuss the results. So one thing I see a lot of, especially for older kids, I see goals that are the Common Core. So if you haven't looked at the Common Core for your child's grade level, read it. It might help you design goals, but Common Core is not the goal. Common Core is general education. Your child is entitled to both, so they should be getting all the Common Core. You might need a goal for supports and services because they're not there, but the goal is not the Common Core. The goals can help you get services, but that's not the goal. So you want them to be as specific as possible. For example, this child struggled a lot with visual perceptual issues, so we wrote a goal for geometric shapes because we were concerned. He wasn't doing geometry yet. They said, we don't need to do a geometry goal because he's not doing geometry. We don't need to write a geometry goal. We don't know that he's not going to do well in geometry. Well, his scores on all the tests of visual perception and visual spatial reasoning on the neuropsychological assessment showed him as being pretty impaired. And the math teacher said, yeah, actually, come to think of it, I think he's going to really struggle with that. So they put the goal in. Behavior goals, setting clear behavior expectations and consequences in each class. This is a goal for the teachers because this was not happening. So we wrote this goal so the teachers would have a goal to follow. So the teacher has to set clear behavior expectations and consequences in the class for the student. What's the student going to do when he's frustrated? So this is a kid that has some kind of behavior, self-regulation, kind of gets angry and storms out of class. So he needs skills. The way he's going to get those skills is we write goals. The goals get him the services. If you have no goals, you have no services. The mom couldn't understand why the OT wanted to drop OT. Well, there were no goals. So this is how you get the services. You add all the areas of need, and then now you need someone to work on that with him. So now he has 2 45-minute one-on-one instruction periods a week just for executive function, because that was his primary deficit area, plus resource room, I think 3 afternoons a week, and then behavior consult, I think twice a week. I mean, there's a lot of services that go along with this. Here's the executive function goals. I mentioned that there were quite a few. I'll let you look at them on the PowerPoint. He has a vocational goal. So he's a freshman in high school. It's not the best vocational goal. This was actually written by the vocational teacher, but it's better than no goal, right? So he's going to start to think about, he's starting to do some of that executive function stuff and thinking, where do I want to be in the next 5 weeks? How can I improve? And this is now written in the IEP, which means the school is obligated to do it. So talking about it in a meeting and saying, that sounds nice, does not change anything. If it's not written, goals are really a place to put what things you want to see happen, because the school is held accountable to these goals. And you can actually complain, file a state complaint or file a due process against the school if they don't meet, if the child doesn't make progress in the goals. A couple training and employment. So these were also written by the vocational teacher, which I thought weren't bad. Let's research the application requirements and procedures for college. This kid wanted to go to college. He's going to start identifying skills needed for occupations. I do want to say one thing about kids who are aspiring to college. There's a mom here this weekend whose daughter is a junior in high school, and she called me in a panic a few months ago. Why didn't you tell me about the College Board accommodations? Because I didn't know, and now I've learned about this a bit. If you think your child might be college bound and be taking the ACT or the SAT, you want to apply for the accommodations as a freshman, and it's a process. It might take a few months. It might get kicked back. You might have to reapply. The school is not responsible for that. The parent is. There are many things the school doesn't tell you. So you want to start looking into those things, and you want to do everything early. Now, you might not take that test till junior year, but if you wait till the beginning of your junior year to do that, it takes 3 months to get the response. They say no, now you're reapplying, and the test is in March, and you don't have the accommodations, and then the child has to take the test without the accommodations. So I just want to throw that in there. I'm happy to talk more about that afterwards. So the definition of transition is a coordinated set of activities. This is what the law requires. Okay, this is IDEA, the federal law. It has to be results oriented. So what you've laid out, what the state mandate is here, it's required under the law, under the IEP till age 22 for every child who has an IEP. And it's focusing on that movement from school to post-school and in all those areas. And it's based on those individual student needs and the strengths, preference, and interests, which Britta spoke so well about. And I think looking at some of those resources would be great. I've looked through all of them, and they're excellent resources. And more than that, we're not just saying what we want, we're not just writing goals about it, we're talking about what's the instruction needed. So what executive skills, functions, instruction does the child need, for example? What related services? So maybe OT was dropped, but now the child has a goal to be a costume designer, fashion designer. But sewing is really hard. So maybe some OT skills are needed now to develop skills that weren't needed before. Because oftentimes we think, oh, the child aged out of physical therapy. They aged out of occupational therapy. Transition is the time to get those goals back. Because now you can start to say, well, yeah, that's great. It didn't need OT for a while, but now this child has this, and the transition goals have to be based on the student's preferences. So it can't just be the school doesn't decide. They can't say, well, she can't do sewing because she can't sew. Well, no, she wants to sew. So you have to teach her. She's going to need a lot of OT support to work on this. This is just an example. Those community experiences, employment, The rest of this, I think you talked a lot about. And again, the if appropriate in our kids, these are things our kids are going to need. If it says if appropriate in our kids, because of the complexity, it's appropriate. And then the services can be special education. It can be that specially designed instruction or a related service if it's required to help the student benefit from special education. And I talked about specially designed instruction before. I'm not going to go over this slide. I'll let you look at it online. If you have any specific questions afterwards, please let me know. And then the course of study. So if the child needs to be in advanced placement courses to meet their academic post-secondary goal because they want to go to college, that can be in the IEP, that the child will participate in advanced placement courses. Or it might be that the child needs community-based experiences to help acquire those adult living and employment skills. Or it could be both. And the child could be getting straight A's. Does that mean they no longer are entitled to getting transition services or an IEP? No, because we're looking at functional, we're looking at social, we're looking at emotional, we're looking at recreation, we're looking at community access, job skills, all those things. The meeting is going to be to look at what the needs are. You have to invite the student. You have to consider the student's strengths, preference, and interests. Identify the services. Consider self-determination. Teach the student how to self-advocate. If the student comes to their IEP meeting in 9th grade, I like to start transition assessment process in 8th grade. You request the evaluation. It has to have a good transition assessment. And the child starts to attend their IEP in 8th grade. That's my dream world, right? If they can't self-advocate, if they can't speak up at the meeting by 9th grade, you need to have a goal in self-advocacy, because what's going to happen 4 years later when they maybe want to go to the junior college and they don't understand what the teacher's saying because they're talking too fast like me, and they want to raise their hand and say, slow down, I can't understand you, or you're not using the assistive listening device that we provided, or my note taker's not here, or whatever. They have to, that's a part of the IEP that should be in the goals. Oh, excuse me. The course of study, I mentioned the signing up for the SAT, ACT accommodations by 10th grade at the latest. This mom I talked to said 9th grade would be better. Choose the diploma selected. So this is the other issue I see a lot is parents get to 10th, 11th grade and they're like, well, they're saying that my child's on a modified diploma. I didn't know that. Or the child graduates with a diploma and they're like, oh, great. And it's a modified diploma and it's meaningless. It does not help them get into college. It doesn't help them in any post-secondary. And there's been no conversation about this. So if you don't know what diploma track your child is on, you need to know. And by 9th grade, for a regular diploma, you have to start earning credits to graduate. Most districts, I want to say 130 credits is what you need. So you need to be earning 5 credits per semester per class. And if you don't, you have to take summer school, or you have to consider that extending the runway to 22. I've already been at, my son's 15, he's going to be a sophomore. And our case, we're in a non-public school and it's phenomenal, and our case manager came to us and she said, I think Bennett might need a 5th year because he did 3 academics as a freshman. He did okay. He's going to do 4 next year, but junior and senior year it's 5 solids, no electives, no PE. And that's a lot for my kid. I mean, all of our kids, right? So she said, let's start talking about a 5th year. That kind of planning is really important. Start thinking about that early. You don't want to wait till senior year. I need to prepare Bennett for that. Psychologically, for him to get to senior year and think he's graduating with all of his friends and then say, yeah, actually, no, you're not. Talking about it now, and at first when I talked to him about it, he said, no, I don't want to do that, Mom. And then he did summer school this summer for 3 weeks, and he met this really cute, incoming 9th grade girl. And he said to me, you know, Mom, maybe we could talk about that 5th year. And I said, why don't we see how, we're going to see how it goes in the fall. That's kind of where we left it, because we can drop Spanish. We added Spanish, we can drop that, and then redesign his educational plan. When your child is 18, their educational rights transfer to them as an adult, unless you have a conservatorship or a educational power of attorney, very important. We can talk about that later as well. And at the end of this process, they have to provide what's called a summary of performance. They have to basically say, here is the level of academic achievement and functional performance of your child, and here are the recommendations in meeting the post-secondary goals. These are the things that are part of that summary of performance. So we're looking at the achievement, we're looking at assessments, accommodation needs, assistive technology, all the training and independent living skills, support, etc. And that is required for students exiting school with a standard diploma or aging out of the program. So if they don't have a standard diploma at 18, they're staying till 22 to keep working on their goals. Does that mean they're staying at the high school and going back? No, that wouldn't be appropriate. So it's always the appropriate setting. What would be appropriate at that time? Graduation is a change of placement. It requires prior written notice, which means the district has to inform you that they're going to graduate your child. It doesn't require a reevaluation because it's not a change in eligibility and it's not a dismissal from the program, but it is a change of placement. If you get to that, you're approaching the diploma and you really realize, you know what, my kid didn't really learn all this stuff. They've been kind of, and I'm worried. I don't want them to get a diploma and be done. I wish I had 4 more years of transition services. You can refuse the diploma. I'm happy to help you with that. Anyone at Brain Recovery Project is. There's also the Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys. Talk to an advocate, talk to an attorney about that. You can just say, no, thank you. We don't want a diploma. We refuse the diploma, and you can buy yourself some more time. You don't have to buy 4 more years. You might say, my child needs 6 more months, and I want that to be in a vocational training program for culinary skills, because that's where my kid wants to go, and he also needs some additional social skills, so we want to work one-on-one with social skills counselor 3 times a week in different settings, right? So you think about what that would look like for your child. I've talked about this already, free and appropriate public education. It's 21st or 22nd, depending on your state. I think the IDEA says 21. I think some states go to 22. I may have that wrong. Generally, it's 21 or 22. And then there are other things to consider at transition. So health, we have some of the doctors on the panel talked about that transition to adult care. The Child Neurology Foundation has a really nice transition to adult care document that I've started working on. They recommend you start talking about transition to adult care at 14. My son's 15 and a half, almost 16, and we haven't done it yet. And I'm like, okay, so I printed it out. I'm planning on bringing it to the next neurology appointment where you really start thinking about all the medical self-advocacy and all the medical needs and what's going to happen when they're not under your insurance anymore. There's a lot there. And then what's their living situation going to be? What are their housing options? Are there financial needs? Are there legal needs? Waiting until 18, it's too late. So a lot of these things you can start thinking about and planning for now. If you save it all to the end, it will be too overwhelming. So just as much, any of this that you can start thinking about now and start planning now, I highly recommend it. And that is it for me, and I think we have 6 minutes for questions.
We did it.
Woo!
We wanted to do teams.
Okay, well, you know. All right. So, are there any questions? You guys are all tired. We need to go party. We need to go have some cocktails. Okay, Roxanne has a question. I'll answer it for you. Or you what? When you both talk to the mic.
So in our state, there's more community colleges that have transition programs where the public school can pay for it. So instead of receiving that Senior Plus program above the age of 18 in your local school district, you can go to the community college for that Strive Academy or that academy and learn. Do you have any experience or have you worked with any families regarding those programs?
I have. So it's San Francisco. California has free community college now for any high school student. They can start going to junior college when they're juniors in high school. So I recommend that families do that, like just sign the kid up for basket weaving or yoga or something, so they start having the college experience and learning about interacting with different people. Maybe they need supports to go do that. But then in San Francisco, it's our city college, San Francisco City College. I have a number of families that have gone through. They do evaluations. They do adult neuropsych evaluations on their incoming students. They have a staff of 17 resource specialists that work in a lab. It's an incredible program. It just blew me away. They have a range of different kinds of diplomas you can approach, and then they will help you structure your classes. So yes, there are programs out there, and the school district will work in collaboration with our city college, junior college, to help support and implement that IEP and the transition goals within that setting. So yes, and again, I think starting earlier, like don't wait until they're 18 and they're going to the junior college and they're trying to figure out how to navigate a class in a junior college for the first time at 18. Maybe experience that earlier when it doesn't count with the support. And I tell people keep the IEP as long as possible because you want those IEP supports. The IEP support might be someone going with an orientation and mobility specialist, going with them the first week of school and making sure they can navigate the environment. It might be a social skills coach going once a week and helping them interact with people, in the cafeteria, like all those kinds of things. But yeah, definitely using those. There's your district and your state, your district, your city, and your state will have resources that address transition that you can start to tap into. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, let's party. Thank you.